You will fall in love before the week is out, and you will not see it coming until it is standing in front of you eating your bread. That was the fortune. I paid a copper coin for it, and I did not believe a word, until 3 days later I found myself standing in a stranger's doorway with a loaf under my arm, having no memory of deciding to buy it. I am Percival, Alpha King of Farrowgate, and I have led war councils without blinking. I have faced down a rival pack's challenge in the dead of winter with nothing but my voice and my will, and I have signed treaties that saved 1,000 lives with a hand that did not shake. I have stood before my own people in the worst hour of my reign and told them the truth when a comfortable lie would have been easier. But nothing in my life prepared me for the particular helplessness of being told my own future by a laughing young woman with flour on her sleeve, at a fortune-teller's booth strung with tin bells. On the one afternoon a year I dared to walk my own market square without my crown. I had gone to the fair in plain wool, the way my father used to before me, because a king who never walks unguarded among his people forgets what their hands feel like when they shake his. I meant only to buy cider and listen to the fiddler and go home unnoticed, the way I had done every summer since boyhood, trailing my father through the same stalls, learning the weight of a crown by watching how lightly he wore it in public and how heavily in private. That morning the square smelled of roasted chestnuts and crushed straw, and the fiddler was tuning badly enough that half the children nearby had their hands over their ears and were laughing about it. I bought cider from a woman who did not recognize me and complained to me, quite candidly, about the price of barrels this year, and for a quarter of an hour I was simply a man standing in the sun listening to a stranger's grievances, a luxury I am rarely afforded. It was in that loose, unguarded frame of mind that I wandered past a crooked little table draped in blue cloth, hung about with tin bells that rang faintly whenever the wind found them, with a hand-lettered sign propped against a chipped clay pot that read fortunes, true or your coin back. And something, I still could not tell you what, whether it was the crookedness of the table or the look of the young woman behind it, sleeves pushed up, flour dusted along one wrist as though she had come straight from a kitchen to sell fortunes on a whim, made me sit down across from her before I had decided to. "Give me your hand, traveler," she said, "and I will tell you what the cards refuse to keep secret." I gave her my hand. It seemed a small thing at the time. I remember thinking, with the mild condescension of a man who has never once needed a stranger to tell him who he is, that I would humor her for a coin and a laugh and then go on my way, richer by an afternoon's entertainment and nothing more. Her hand, when she took mine to turn it palm up, was warm and quick and entirely unceremonious. "You have a farmer's palm and a lord's boots," she said, studying my hand with a frown of exaggerated concentration that did not fool me for a moment, "which tells me you are either a very successful farmer or a very unsuccessful lord, and either way I am obligated to tell you your fortune regardless." "I will let you decide which I am," I said. "Oh, I never decide," she said. "Deciding is bad for business. Mystery is good for business." She turned over 3 cards with theatrical solemnity, though I caught the corner of her mouth twitching the whole while, as if the performance amused her nearly as much as it was meant to amuse me. "A crown you did not ask for," she said, tapping the first card, which showed a wolf sitting beneath a bent tree, its painted eyes oddly steady for so crude a woodcut. "A house full of people who watch you and do not see you." She tapped the second, a card of a closed door, iron-hinged, painted shut. "And," she said, drawing the third with a flourish that sent her sleeve sliding back to show the dusting of flour at her wrist, "before the week is out, you will fall in love, and you will not see it coming until it is standing in front of you eating your bread." I laughed an honest laugh, the kind I did not often get to spend, the kind that comes up out of a man before he has decided whether it is appropriate. "That is a very specific fortune for a stranger." "Specialize in specific," she said, entirely unbothered by my amusement. "It is more convincing than good things will come to you eventually, which is what I tell everyone who does not tip well." She held out her hand for my coin, and I noticed she did not so much as glance at my boots, which were finer than a traveler's, or at my hands, which had none of the calluses of the farmers and drovers who made up most of her custom that day. She did not know she was holding out her hand to her king. I did not tell her. I liked, for exactly as long as it lasted, being only a traveler who amused her, a stranger with no treaty to sign, no dispute to settle, no daughter of an allied house to be measured against. You are meant to look more troubled by that fortune, she added, when I did not immediately rise from the stool. Most men either laugh it off entirely or go rather pale and ask me for a second opinion. Should I be troubled? Barring a few unusual circumstances, I would not worry. Most fortunes are considerably less dramatic than they sound, in my experience, which is extensive. And how many of your fortunes have come true? That, she said, is a question I am contractually obligated not to answer, on pain of losing all future business. But she smiled as she said it, wide and unguarded, and I found myself thinking, even then, that I would happily have sat at that crooked table a good deal longer than my 1 copper coin entitled me to. I should have told her then who I was. I did not. That was my first mistake, and I do not regret it, because if I had told her, she would have folded her hands and given me a fortune fit for royalty, safe, flattering, forgettable, full of long reigns and prosperous harvests, instead of the truth she did not know she was speaking. Her name, I learned before I left the fairground, was Adelaide. I learned it from the boy selling meat pies 2 stalls down, who pointed at her booth and said, "Oh, that's Adelaide. She does the fortunes for a laugh. She doesn't even believe it. Don't let her fool you. You're—" and here he caught himself, having recognized me a beat too late, and turned the word into an unconvincing cough. I pressed a coin into his hand and asked him, quite seriously, to say nothing of who I was to anyone, least of all the fortune-teller, and he agreed with the solemn delight of a boy who has just been made complicit in something interesting. I did not intend to believe any of it either. Fortunes are for fairs and children and old women who like the shape of mystery better than the shape of truth. I rode home that evening turning the whole encounter over in my mind, not because I credited it, but because it had been, simply, the best afternoon I could remember having in longer than I cared to admit. An hour in which no one had wanted anything from me but the coin already in my palm, and a woman with flour on her wrist had teased me the way one teases an equal, without once flinching at my face the way strangers sometimes do when they realize too late whom they are addressing. And then the loaf happened. It was 3 days later. I was riding the north road back from settling a dispute between 2 farming families over a shared water channel, both sides half in the right and neither willing to say so first, when I passed a farmhouse with bread cooling in the window, and I dismounted without deciding to, walked to the door, and bought a loaf from a startled farmwife for twice its worth, because I had a sudden and overwhelming conviction that I needed bread in my arms before nightfall, though I could not say why. She looked at the coin in her hand and then at me and said, "Begging pardon, sir, but you paid me double," and I told her to keep it, because it seemed easier to overpay a stranger than to confess to being haunted by a market fortune. I stood on her step, loaf warm against my ribs, and thought, with a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air, before the week is out, you will fall in love, and you will not see it coming until it is standing in front of you eating your bread. I told myself it was coincidence. Kings buy bread. I told my steward Corin as much when he raised an eyebrow at the sight of his king walking into the hall with a farmwife's bread cradled like an infant, and he, being a sensible man, agreed with me at once and never mentioned it again, though I noticed, over the following days, that he mentioned it to the cook, who mentioned it to the stable master, who mentioned it, eventually, to half the household. So that by the following morning I was fielding curious looks from servants who had never once looked at me curiously, in all the years I had known them. 2 days after that, Corin, dry as good parchment, not a fanciful man in his life, mentioned over supper that a pack of northern wolves had been sighted circling the old bent oak at the edge of my hunting ground, and that one old woman swore the lead wolf sat beneath the tree of an evening the way a man might sit in a chair he had long considered his own, watching the road as though waiting for someone to come home along it. I stood in my own hall and felt the floor tilt very slightly beneath me, the way it does when a man realizes a joke has quietly become a fact while his back was turned. A crown you did not ask for. A wolf beneath a bent tree. I had not asked for the crown either, not truly. My father had died before I was ready, and the weight had simply been set upon me, with no chance to prepare, no ceremony of consent. "Is something the matter, Your Grace?" Corin asked, watching me set down my knife with more care than the gesture required. "No," I said, only remembering something I was told at the fair. "The fortune-teller's booth," he said, with the faint, weary patience of a man who has heard rather more than he let on. "Half the kitchen knew within the hour. You hummed for the rest of the afternoon. You have not hummed since your father's funeral." I had no answer for that, and so I ate the rest of my supper in a silence Corin was tactful enough not to disturb. The third piece came the following evening, when my Aunt Herminia, who has opinions about my unmarried state, the way rivers have opinions about which way is downhill, cornered me after supper with a list of eligible daughters of allied houses, sat me down in the good chair by the fire, and talked at me for the better part of an hour while I did not hear a single word she said, because a house full of people who watch you and do not see you is not a fortune. It is a description of every evening I have spent since my father died, every meal at which I am watched for signs of weakness or readiness or grief, and never once simply looked at, the way one looks at a friend across a table. I sat in that good chair with her voice washing over me like a tide I had long since stopped trying to swim against, and thought of a young woman with flour on her sleeve who had looked at me across a crooked table and seen, for one unguarded hour, nothing but a traveler worth teasing. "You are not listening to a word I say," Herminia said at last, not unkindly, setting down her list with the air of a general accepting a lost skirmish. "I am listening," I said. "I simply find myself unable to care very much about the third daughter of a house I have never visited, whose chief virtue, by your own account, is that she plays the harp adequately. Adequately is a great deal, Percival, in a house where the last 3 candidates I proposed played it not at all. I do not need a wife who plays the harp adequately," I said. "I need one who will look at me and see a man, not a treaty." Herminia studied me for a long moment. "Something has happened to you," she said. "You have that look my brother used to get the year before he married your mother." "Nothing has happened," I said, which was by that point already a lie of some magnitude. 3 pieces. A door, a wolf, a house of watching eyes. I am not a superstitious man. I have never once consulted a hedge witch about my harvests or worn a charm against ill luck. But I am not a fool either, and a king who ignores a pattern because it frightens him to name it is not fit to rule anyone, least of all himself. So I did what any sensible man would do upon suspecting he had been fated by a stranger over a fortune-teller's table. I went to find her and asked her plainly what she thought she had done to me. She was not at her booth. The blue cloth was still draped over the crooked table when I arrived at the market square the next morning, but the table itself sat empty, the tin bells silent, a small hand-lettered notice pinned beside the sign that read simply "Closed." I stood there longer than a king ought to stand looking at an empty table, and might have gone on standing there had the meat pie boy not appeared at my elbow, wiping his hands on his apron with the particular relish of someone delivering gossip he has been saving up all morning for exactly this occasion. "Oh, Adelaide's not doing fairs this week, Your Grace," he said, glancing about first to be sure no one stood close enough to overhear the title. "She heard about the wolves at the bent oak and about you buying old Farron's bread for twice its price, and she went positively pale, begging your pardon. She thinks she's cursed somebody. Cursed you, actually. She's mortified. Won't come out of her aunt's house except to fetch water, and even then she goes the long way round so she doesn't have to pass the market square. Cursed, I repeated, and found I was fighting down a smile in a manner unbecoming of a king receiving grave news. She said, and I'm only telling you what she told me, mind, she said. I am not a witch. I sell fortunes for copper so I can buy ribbon and thread. I did not mean to summon anything, and if the Alpha King's own wolf pack starts appearing in my dreams next, I am moving to the coast and taking up fishing instead, where the worst thing I can accidentally do is catch too many herring. I confess I laughed until my ribs ached, alone in the market square, in a manner wholly unbefitting a king receiving grave news of an accidental curse upon his own person. Several passers-by gave me the startled, sideways look one gives a man laughing without evident cause, and I did not care in the least. Then I turned toward the lane that led to her aunt's house, because a woman who believes she has accidentally cursed me with true love is not a woman I intend to let hide from me for even one more day, however much I understood even then why she might wish to. I sent Corin ahead to have my horse readied and told him, when he asked where I meant to go on a morning I had set aside for the treasury accounts, only that a matter of the kingdom's fortune required my personal attention. He did not question it, though he did ask whether I meant to take an escort, and I told him no, that whatever I was riding toward would not be improved by 6 armed men trailing behind me looking grave. Her aunt's house sat at the lane's end behind a hedge gone wild with late summer roses, small and whitewashed, with a chimney that smoked faintly, and a garden gate that hung a little crooked on its hinge. I saw the curtain in the front window twitch before I had even dismounted, and I took a moment, standing there among the roses with my horse's reins loose in my hand, to consider how I meant to say what I had come to say. I had faced hostile chieftains and my own council in open revolt, and none of it had required the particular care I found myself taking now, standing before a cottage door, trying to decide how a king says I believe you may have accidentally spoken my heart back to me without sounding either mad or unbearably pompous. By the time I reached the door it was already opening a cautious 3 inches, one brown eye visible in the gap, regarding me with the wary suspicion of a woman who has spent 3 days convinced that speaking to strangers is now a hazardous occupation. "You're the traveler," she said, in the tone of a woman confirming a diagnosis she had hoped was wrong. "I am also, as it turns out, the Alpha King," I said. "I should have mentioned that at the booth. I apologize for the confusion it has apparently caused you, and for the wolves, though I promise you I did not send them." The door opened another inch. The eye widened, and behind it I could see the color draining from and then rushing back into her face in quick succession, as though her body could not decide whether to be mortified or furious first, and had settled, in the end, on attempting both at once. "You let me read your palm and tell you that you'd fall in love with a bread thief, and you didn't think to say, you let me tease a king. I called you a man who needed someone to laugh with. I told the meat pie boy about it. I told half the fair about it before I knew any better, and you just sat there, letting me. Do you have any notion what it has been like, these 3 days, waiting to see whether I have accidentally set something terrible in motion? I have not slept properly since the wolves. I keep imagining you cursed with something dreadful, and it being entirely my fault, on account of a joke I made to earn ribbon money." "I did not know it would come true," I said. "In my defense, neither did you, or you would hardly have said it so lightly." "I still don't think it's come true," she said, with the particular stubbornness of a person defending a position she has already begun to abandon in her own heart. "Bread and wolves and a house of watchers, that's not falling in love. That's just 3 unrelated coincidences arranged by an unkind universe to look frightening. And I would like it noted that I want my coin back, and also that I would like never to accidentally curse anyone important again as long as I live, and also that this is an extremely strange way to spend a Tuesday." and also that I have practiced several versions of this apology in front of my aunt's looking-glass, and none of them accounted for you actually standing here. You have not cursed me, I said. May I come in? I would rather have this conversation without a door between us. It seems an odd way to discuss fate, shouting it through a gap no wider than a hand. She hesitated. I watched her weigh, in the space of a breath, the scandal of admitting an unmarried king into her aunt's front room against the greater scandal of leaving him standing among the roses where the whole lane could see and speculate, and opened the door the rest of the way, stepping back to let me pass with the stiff formality of someone who has decided, against her better instincts, to be brave about an impossible morning. Her aunt's front room was small and bright, sunlight coming in slantwise through a window hung with drying lavender, the whole room smelling faintly of it, of rosemary, and of the particular warm must of old wood that has stood through many winters. A cat slept in a patch of sun on the windowsill, and regarded me, upon my entrance, with total and magnificent disinterest, which I appreciated more than I can say, as everyone else in the kingdom that week had regarded me with either terror or calculation, and it was a relief to be looked at by something that wanted nothing from me whatsoever. Adelaide's aunt, I gathered from the sound of humming somewhere further back in the house, was occupied with some task in the garden, and either had not noticed her king's arrival or had decided, with admirable discretion, to remain occupied a good while longer. Adelaide herself stood with her arms crossed, chin lifted in the particular posture of a person bracing to be told off and determined to get her own objections in first, though I could see, beneath the bravado, that her hands were not quite steady. I want to say, she began before I could speak at all, that I did not mean any of it. I read fortunes because it is more fun than selling turnips at my uncle's stall, which is the alternative, and I am good at reading faces, not futures. I can tell when a man is lonely or grieving or trying too hard to seem important, and I say something that fits, and people like to hear it, and I did not think for one moment that any of it was true, not the way a prophecy is true, only true the way a good guess is true. I told you that fortune because you looked like a man who needed someone to laugh with, not because I saw anything real in the cards. If something has genuinely gone wrong in the fabric of the world because of me, I would like to know now, plainly, so I can begin apologizing properly and perhaps also begin packing, because I understand kings have ways of dealing with women who curse them, and I would like advance warning if that is what is about to happen. Nothing has gone wrong, I said. Something has gone right, and it is frightening you far worse than if it had gone wrong, which I confess I find almost as interesting as the fortune itself. That is a very kingly thing to say, and it does not reassure me at all. I found, standing in that small bright room with the cat ignoring me and the lavender turning slowly in the window light, that I did not know how to explain to her what I had come to explain, because I had not fully explained it to myself yet either. Only felt it, 3 separate times now, like a hand laid flat and warm against the center of my chest each time one of her careless words turned solid in the world. As though the fortune had been less a prediction, and more a door she had opened without knowing a room stood behind it. So I told her plainly, the way I would lay out a truth to my counsel, without ornament, because ornament would only give her more places to hide from it, and because she seemed, above all things, to be a woman who valued being told the truth over being told something pretty. I'm past 30 and unmarried, I said, and every house in this kingdom has tried to arrange that for me since I was old enough to be arranged. Every woman I have ever been introduced to at supper or at court has known exactly who I was before she ever looked at me, has looked at the crown first, and the man only after, if at all, and often not even then. Which means I have never once in my adult life been looked at by a woman who saw only a man across a table. You did. For the length of one fortune and one shared laugh, you saw a traveler, and you told him something true without meaning to, because you were not performing for a king. You were only being yourself with a stranger, teasing him because he looked like he needed teasing. That is not a curse, Adelaide. That is the rarest thing that has happened to me in 10 years, and I have chased it from the market square to your aunt's front room because I did not want to spend one more day pretending I had not noticed. She had gone very quiet, the crossed arms slowly loosening, though she still watched me with the wariness of a woman who does not entirely trust a gift that arrives already this large. The cards were just cards, she said, but softer now, testing the words rather than throwing them, the way one tests ice before deciding whether it will bear weight. I painted the wolf one myself. I am not very good at painting. Its ears are uneven. I have never once believed my own deck told anyone's fortune, least of all a king's. The cards were cards, I agreed. Pieces of painted board, an uneven-eared wolf and all, and I dare say if I asked you to draw 3 more you would draw me something about good harvests and long life, because that is what fortunes are for. But you are not just cards, and I do not think it is sorcery that 3 things you said to amuse a stranger have come to pass exactly as you said them. I think it is only that some part of you already knew what I did not yet know myself, and it came out sideways, dressed up as a joke, because the truth was too large to say plainly to a man you had just met across a fortune-teller's table. I do not think you cursed me, Adelaide. I think you saw me before I had ever let anyone see me, and it frightened you exactly as much as it delighted me. And what truth is that? She said, and I heard, under the challenge in it, the smallest tremor of a woman who already suspected the answer and did not trust herself to be right, who had perhaps spent 3 sleepless nights turning the question over and arriving, each time, at an answer too large to say aloud first. I did not answer with words, not at first. I crossed the small room, past the drying lavender, past the unimpressed cat still dozing in its patch of sun, and took her hand the way she had taken mine at the booth, palm up, as though I meant to read her fortune in return, though I had no cards and no need of any. The moment my fingers closed around hers, something happened that I have no name ready for, because it was unlike anything the old songs or my own father's stories had prepared me to expect. It was not a howl rising in my chest, nor any surge of some hidden animal self-clawing to be let loose. It was the precise, absurd, unmistakable sensation of a held breath finally let out after a lifetime of not knowing it was held, a whole-body exhale, as if some door I had not known was shut in me had simply swung open onto ordinary daylight, plain and warm and entirely without ceremony. She gasped, faint and startled, her fingers tightening around mine before she seemed to decide whether she meant to let them, and I understood from the sudden color rushing into her face that she had felt some version of the very same thing, that same shut door swinging wide in her all at once, letting in air she had not known she was missing. "Oh," she said, staring down at our joined hands as though they belonged to 2 other people entirely, borrowed for the occasion. "Oh, that is not what a curse feels like at all. I would know. I have imagined it rather a lot these past 3 days, lying awake wondering what shape a curse takes when it finally comes to collect, whether it announces itself with thunder or simply arrives quietly one morning and ruins everything without ceremony." "No," I said. "It is rather the opposite of one, I think, though I confess I have no better name for it than you do. My grandfather used to say the old bond announces itself differently to every pair it finds, and that no 2 people who have felt it describe it quite the same way, which always struck me as a convenient excuse for never having to describe it clearly himself. I begin to understand why. I would not have believed, an hour ago, that I would describe the great fated bond of my line as feeling like the moment a held breath finally goes out of a man, but there it is. That is what it is. That is exactly what it is, and I do not think I could improve on it if I tried for a year." "A held breath," she repeated, as though testing the phrase for weight. "That is not very poetic for a king." "I did warn you I would only ever draw crowns and long reigns," I said. "It seems my imagination extends to breathing and very little else. You will have to forgive me for not producing something out of a ballad." "I think I prefer the held breath," she said slowly. Ballads are always claiming things burn or ache or howl, and none of that sounds especially pleasant when you stop to think about it. A held breath finally let out sounds like relief. I would rather feel relief than agony if I am to feel anything at all about a king I met 3 days ago over a deck of badly painted cards. Then we are agreed, I said. Relief it is. I shall have it inscribed somewhere, so that future kings of my line do not have to invent their own description on the spot while standing in a borrowed front room with a disapproving cat for witness. The cat does not disapprove, she said. The cat has opinions about nothing except sunlight and supper. I have had that cat 5 years, and it has never once shown any interest in my affairs, romantic or otherwise, which I have always found rather restful. That startled a laugh out of her, the same laugh I had heard at the booth, unguarded, delighted despite herself, rising up out of her before she had decided whether the moment called for laughter or tears, and something in me settled at the sound of it the way a held note settles into its final chord after a long and uncertain measure. You cannot bribe fate with a metaphor, Percival, she said, and then went faintly pink at having used my name with no title in front of it, as though it had slipped out of her the way the fortune had slipped out of her 3 days before, without her quite meaning it to. You may call me that as often as you like, I said. I find I have been waiting rather a long time to hear it said without ceremony, without a bow first and a careful distance kept after. I have been your grace and my king, and on one memorable occasion, his sovereign radiance, courtesy of an ambassador who overdid it badly, and whom I have never quite let live it down. But I have not been simply Percival to anyone since my father died and stopped calling me by it himself. That is a very sad thing to say in the middle of what is supposed to be a whimsical conversation about accidental fortune-telling. I did not say it to make you sad, I said. I said it because it is true, and because I find I want you to know the true things about me now, before we go any further, rather than let you discover them slowly the way everyone else has had to, filtered through Corin's careful diplomacy or my aunt's exhausting matchmaking. You saw a lonely traveler at your booth and were kind to him without knowing why he needed it. I would like you to go on seeing that man, even now that you know the rest of him comes with a crown attached, and a steward who reports my every hum to the kitchen, and an aunt who has strong opinions about harp players. Harp players, she said. Now you are simply inventing details to make me laugh. I wish I were, I said. I have a list. It has grown considerably longer since I discovered you existed. On the grounds that you are the only candidate on it, I did not personally have to interview across a formal supper. She was quiet a moment, turning my hand over in hers as if she might find, this time, an honest card printed somewhere in my palm. If I had known you were the king, she said slowly, I would never have said any of it. I would have given you some dreadfully polite nonsense about prosperity and long life, and you would have ridden on to whatever kings ride on to, and none of this would have happened at all. Then I am glad you did not know, I said, or I would still be sitting in my hall tonight, listening to my aunt's list of eligible daughters, nodding at names I will have forgotten by morning, wondering why none of them had ever once made me want to buy a farm wife's bread for twice its worth, and stand on her step grinning like a boy who has gotten away with something. That is the strangest compliment I have ever received in my life, and I have received a marriage proposal from a man who compared me to a particularly reliable plow horse. It is, nonetheless, the truest compliment I have ever given, I said, and I would very much like to hear the full story of the plow horse at some later date, though I suspect I will not enjoy it. She laughed again, and this time did not seem embarrassed by it, and I thought that perhaps this was the shape the bond would take between us from now on, not solemn vows shouted into a storm, not some great burning declaration, but this, exactly this, a small bright room smelling of lavender, a cat unbothered by kings, and a woman laughing at her own joke while she held my hand as though she had decided, quite suddenly, that she was allowed to. "I still want my coin back," she said at last, though she was smiling now, wide and unguarded, the fair day smile she had not fully hidden from a stranger she thought she would never see again. A copper, for a fortune that turned out to be entirely too accurate for a woman who was only trying to earn enough for ribbon and thread. "I will pay you in loaves instead," I said. "One for every year, if you will let me bring them myself, and I will make old Farron's widow teach me her recipe first, so that you cannot accuse me of buying my way out of the debt with someone else's baking. I imagine I will burn the first several attempts. You should prepare yourself for disappointing bread." That is either the most romantic or the most ridiculous thing anyone has ever said to me at my aunt's front door. We once bought a goat at this door from a peddler I did not stop fast enough. Its name is Bartholomew. My aunt insists it was a very good bargain. "With me," I said, "it is very often both at once, romantic and ridiculous in the same breath, and I suspect it will go on being both for as long as you will have me. You will have to decide, sooner or later, whether you can live with a king who buys bread like a besotted farm, quotes his own fortune back to himself at inconvenient moments, and will very likely wish to meet Bartholomew before the week is out, since I have never met a goat with a name that grand." She considered it, or pretended to, the corner of her mouth already betraying her, the same twitch I had first seen across her crooked table 3 days and what felt like a lifetime ago, and did not let go of my hand while she thought it over, which told me everything her answer would eventually be before she ever said it aloud. "I suppose," she said at last, with the grave and terrible seriousness of a woman about to say something she does not mean to be taken seriously at all, that a woman who has accidentally arranged her own fate ought to see it through properly, rather than leave the job half done. It would be poor craftsmanship otherwise. I have a reputation to consider. True or your coin back is not a sign I hung up lightly." "A very fine reputation," I agreed. "Truest fortunes in Farrogate, and I will testify to it personally, in front of my whole council if necessary, though I imagine they will simply want to know when the wedding is and whether they are invited." "You are moving a great deal faster than a woman who has known you for less than an hour today," she said, though she was laughing as she said it. "I have known you for 3 days," I said, "which in fortune-teller's time, I am given to understand, is roughly equivalent to a courtship of several months, on account of the wolves, the bread, and my aunt's harp players all having done a great deal of the courting for me while I was still working up the nerve to ride out here." "That is a very convenient way of counting," she said, "and I notice you have not once let go of my hand this entire conversation." "No," I agreed. "I find I have no intention of doing so, unless you ask it of me, in which case I will, because I meant what I said before about choice. You are not obligated to want any of this simply because a bond has decided we suit each other. I would rather you choose it slowly and mean it than have it handed to you by fate and feel cornered by the handing." She looked at me for a long moment then, something in her face going soft and serious beneath the laughter, and did not let go of my hand either. "I think," she said, "that I have already been choosing it since the moment you laughed at my terrible fortune instead of walking away offended, though I did not know it at the time, and I am fairly certain the wolves and the bread only confirmed what I had already half decided before I ever knew your name." We stood there a while longer in her aunt's front room, the lavender turning gently in a draught from the window, the cat rousing itself at last to blink at us both with an air of faint, aristocratic patience, as though it had known precisely how this particular fortune would end, and had simply been waiting for the rest of us to arrive at the obvious conclusion in our own slow time. Outside, I could hear the lane's ordinary sounds resuming, a cart, a dog, someone calling a child in to supper, and distantly, what I was fairly certain was the disgruntled bleat of a goat named Bartholomew objecting to something. The whole unremarkable world going on exactly as it always had, entirely unaware that inside one small whitewashed cottage, A king and a fortune-teller had just finished proving a joke true in the gentlest way either of them could have asked for. It took the better part of a week to coax her back to her booth. She was convinced, for several days after, that appearing again in the market square would only invite more uncanny coincidences, and she made me promise, with mock solemnity, that I would not buy any more bread from strangers in her presence, on the grounds that she did not trust either of us not to accidentally summon something else entirely. I agreed, though I broke that promise within the hour, because the meat pie boy offered me a pie the moment we arrived, and it seemed unkind to refuse a boy who had kept our secrets so faithfully. Adelaide declared this did not count, since pies were not mentioned anywhere in the original fortune, and I did not argue the point, because arguing with her when she was pretending to be stern was rapidly becoming one of my favorite occupations. She set her table up in its usual crooked spot, blue cloth and tin bells and all, and I sat across from her exactly as I had the first time, though this time half the market square knew precisely who I was, and there was a great deal of craning and whispering from the surrounding stalls that neither of us pretended not to notice. "Give me your hand, traveler," she said again, though this time she was smiling too widely to hold the mysterious tone for more than a moment. "Let us see whether the cards have anything new to say, now that the old fortune has been so thoroughly and embarrassingly proven." "Be gentle," I said. "I am still recovering from the last one." She turned over a single card this time, unhurried, and it showed she swore afterward she had not chosen it on purpose, though I have never quite believed her, two hands joined together beneath a wide, unclouded sky. "Well," she said, studying it with far less theatrical solemnity than before and far more honesty, "it seems the cards have run out of clever ways to embarrass you, Your Grace, and have simply decided to state the plain truth for once." "And what is the plain truth?" I asked, though I already knew, because I could feel it in the warmth of her hand still resting loosely in mine, the same held-breath ease that had not left me since her aunt's front room, quieter now but no less certain, settled into something less like astonishment and more like belonging. "That some fortunes," she said, "are not predictions at all. They are only the truth, arriving a little early, dressed up as a joke because it did not yet have anywhere better to wear itself." She looked up at me over the crooked table, flour long since washed from her wrist, but her eyes exactly as quick and unguarded as they had been the very first time. And around us the fair went on being a fair, the fiddler still tuning badly, the smell of chestnuts and plums, the ordinary golden noise of a market square that had no notion it was standing witness to anything at all. And I thought that if this was the whole of what fate had arranged for me, a crooked table and a laughing woman and a coin I would happily go on paying for the rest of my life, then I had gotten, by any measure I cared to use, considerably the better end of the bargain.